Hi, Darin Mangum here. Just thought I would post another video on, again, common issues that come up all the time when I'm drafting private placement memorandums or PPMs for clients. Today I wanted to talk about some critical clauses that I think every private placement memorandum needs. I've identified 7. There's probably many more. I just in the past few weeks drafting some offering documents, it became clear to me. Sometimes I'll even review PPMs for clients that are done elsewhere. I've got, there's a lot of other law firms, or, sometimes they'll find a PPM on the web, Regulation D resources, lots of, they're obviously not law firms or lawyers, but they're just, they crank out a PPM for you, which, it is, you kind of get what you pay for, I think, on those. But anyway, I just kind of in my practice of the past 17 years, I've identified 7 really, I think, critical clauses that I think every PPM needs. Again, regardless of whether I do it, you just, you definitely want to make sure your PPM has it. The first one is, I think, something to the effect of a clause in there in the risk factor section that says we may pivot or we may change our initial focus, especially in a startup company, especially when you have an initial, your initial business plan maybe outlined, and you may think it's set in stone and you're never going to change it. However, we've seen that if you're smart, if you're an entrepreneur, you know that you're eventually going to pivot and change and shift to focus, and you may, have anywhere from 10 to 20 different pivots by the time you find something that really has traction in the marketplace. And so, what you don't want is for your PPM to all of a sudden, your investor to say, "Hey, wait a second, that's great. We're heading off in this other direction, but." Hey, I invested on this deal, and now I'm going to hold your feet to the fire on your PPM. So I think if you give yourself some flexibility there to pivot and say, hey, we may adopt a totally different change of course of business plan, have something in there to protect you to that effect. I think that's important. Another clause I think is important is just an errors and omissions type clause that basically says, hey, there may be errors or mistakes in this PPM, or whether it's in the numbers or in the and things like that. But there may be, again, I mean, we look at PPMs all the time, and you look at it and you pass it around to the management, and there may be everybody's eyes glaze over after several revisions of it, and some stuff you just, some little details you sometimes miss, and you have to go back and correct those sometimes. And so, you have a clause in there that basically says, hey, look, there may be errors and omissions, and but these are immaterial to the overall business plan, and we reserve the right to make those corrections if we find those. And that way, again, in case you do have some sort of little errors or mistakes in your PPM, it doesn't turn out to be a critical or a fatal error, right? Or at least you have that argument to say, hey, look, well, we've got this clause in there that basically says, hey, obviously some of these mistakes may be clearly obvious, sometimes maybe not, but at least you allow yourself that flexibility. The third mistake I see people make is they corner themselves into a predetermined minimum offering, right? They may see, oh, everybody else has $1 million minimum PPM, so I'll just do that. They'll just copy what other people do, right? Well, look, if you don't really need a minimum offering PPM, if you're able to, with your first investment in the door, your first $25,000 or whatever you're raising, if you're able to put that to work immediately, and you don't need to, let's say, buy some property or buy some sort of equipment to make your deal viable, then by all means go to a lower minimum offering threshold. I see clients, they say, oh, here, we're going to need to raise $1 million. We're going to give the money back. Well, that sounds great in the beginning, but then 3 or 4 or 5 months into it, they find, oh, we've raised 700,000 and we just can't seem to get any, kind of beyond that. In the meantime, investors are going to start asking for their money back and say, hey, this is not, we're tired of waiting, right, for you to launch. So, give us our money back. So, think really carefully about the minimum offering that you set. The fourth thing is make sure you have a green shoe provision, which is on the opposite end of the spectrum. Again, you may have a maximum offer and think, oh, we just need 2 million and that's going to be plenty. And then let's say you oversubscribe, you got, you raise your 2 million and you got another $500,000 that is wanting to come in. And, if your maximum is of 2 million, now and you want to raise more than that on the same offering, you've got to go back to all the investors and amend the PPM. If your PPM has a green shoe provision that allows you to expand the offering beyond that maximum, then, not a problem. You just go and do that. The fifth thing I've identified is make sure you have in your subscription documents the incorporation of the operating agreement by reference and that they're adhering to that operating agreement or those the governing documents of the company, right? All too often, sometimes they'll sign subscription agreements, but the operating agreement may not be a part of the PPM, and so then they try to get them to sign the operating agreement separately, and you never get signatures on it. What you want to do is make it as easy as possible. Have the investor sign one document that basically accepts the terms of the PPM and signs the operating agreement by reference, and have all of that. You just want to make it as streamlined as possible. You go and pile a bunch of different signatures in front of the investor. It's just easier just to have one signature. So the last two, number 6 is you want to have broad discretion of use of funds. You want to give yourself unless the investors are really pushing back and saying, no, we're going to lock you into, just using the funds for these, for this specific amount. You want to, give yourself some clauses in there to say, hey, this is what we think we're going to use it for. But then again, there may be other things that we could use, that come up that we may need to use the money for. And we want the discretion to go ahead and use those funds accordingly, right? So you want to build flexibility. And then the last thing is it may not seem that important, but I've seen clients that's the choice of forum if there is any sort of dispute or any kind of litigation that arises. Like clients all the time is like, oh, well, I'm going to incorporate in Delaware and we're going to go to the Delaware courts, and because Delaware is, great, and okay, well, that's great in concept, but in actual practice, okay, well, if you do have litigation, you got to go fly, you got to fly to Delaware and hang out there for a week or two, or hire, lawyers that you may not be familiar with. Again, I always advise to pick the forum that you live in that's most convenient to you as far as any kind of dispute resolution clause in your operating agreement and elsewhere. If there was any kind of litigation that arose or dispute resolution, it's not a big inconvenience for you, and you have those investors in the subscription documents agreeing to that choice of forum. That way, you're not having to, you're able to hire local counsel, local attorneys that may be at least more convenient to you, and all of that. So anyway, I know this is a little bit longer video than what I usually post, but those are kind of 7, I think, critical clauses that I think should be in any PPM, and you really need serious consideration. So anyway, happy to, again, if you want me to take a look at your existing PPM, I'm happy to do that. I've done reviews of other, whether that's done by an attorney or not. I think, I definitely can maybe help do some good as far as reviewing your PPM. And obviously, all of my PPMs have have these kind of clauses in there to make sure that's covered. So anyway, if you have any questions or want to talk about any of these type topics, feel free to give me a call, 801-787-9072. Again, appreciate you watching, and we'll see you soon. Thanks. Bye.